for the star of our show, Brian Whitehead. As you all know, you want to spotlight Brian as well as me. So before becoming program chair at the McDowell Conservancy, Brian served almost 10 years as an interpretive ranger for National Park Services. He's helped thousands of visitors while working at the Visitor Center in Yosemite, Zion, as well as the Everglades, Glacier Bay, and Carlsbad Cavern. I don't even look old enough to have done all those things. Brian is surviving, and right now he looks like he's thriving, his first summer in Arizona, and is thrilled to be able to share some of his experiences with us. So we're so happy all of us joined you today. This may be a new record. We currently have 70 participants, with some of the screens being multiple. So yay, Brian, because lots of good information for all of us. Thank you for joining us, and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Max, for that introduction. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. As Max mentioned, I do have some history with the National Park Service. And so before I start sharing my screen, I just wanted to bring out a prop for the day. This is my actual ranger hat. And for a limited time only, it'll be available in the office for photo ops, or, you know, we can see if our hat sizes are the same. But yeah, come on and check that out.
Love the Smokey the Bear hat.
Yeah, I remember my S101 class in January. There were stewards in that class that when they found out I was a ranger, the hat came up. It was like such an iconic look of a park ranger that everybody recognizes. So yeah, I thought it'd be nice to let everybody see that.
And you know, I forgot to mention, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, everyone, and then we will get to as many as we can at the end of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going to share, excuse me, share my screen. And so first of all, I just want to again thank everybody for joining this Lunch and Learn. The title is Engaging Visitors in the Preserve. And, you know, there was a lot of discussions in the spring. Multiple parts of the Conservancy were talking about engaging visitors, how to improve or fine tune that. And so this Lunch and Learn was one of the ideas generated at that time. Since then, there's several other things that I'll try to explain. But you know, this is not the most exciting title, Engaging Visitors in the Preserve. So first of all, thank you once again for everybody showing up to this. And while I was developing the talk and earlier this week, I realized that a much better name would have been How to Be a Ranger. I'm going to share some of the similarities between stewards and rangers, and some of the tips from my experience that, you know, if incorporated into the day-to-day activities of stewards, might really be something new to learn and try, and maybe fun for some of you. So thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to start out by just sort of recapping some of my background. I've worked in 5 national parks, and so here they are highlighted on the map. I'm gonna briefly talk about each one. So we're gonna start with Yosemite in California. I started at Yosemite in 2012 as a volunteer, and so I showed up at the park without a job. And as a volunteer, they actually provide free housing, but at Yosemite that meant a campsite to camp in. And so I lived in my tent for about 4 months that summer while I learned how to be a ranger. And by the end of that 4 months, I had earned the Individual Volunteer of the Year award, which I was pretty thrilled about. And just really never stopped from that point on. Was hired as a ranger at Yosemite, and that was the first time in the uniform, and it was quite a thrill. And so here I am on the top of North Dome with a half dome in the distance, and some uncomfortably dark clouds. I probably shouldn't have been up there at that time, but you know, I was an invincible ranger at that moment. But some fast facts about my time at Yosemite. I spent some time living in a building called the Rangers Club, which is one of the first structures ever built as specific housing for Rangers. And it was like living in a museum, which was pretty cool. But it came with a lot of strings attached. And while I was at Yosemite, I was evacuated for wildfires twice. But I guess that's maybe more par for the course when you're living in California. All right, so after Yosemite, I was lucky enough to get a job in a completely different area, the Everglades. Everglades is the river of grass, famous for the tropical influences in the southern tip of Florida. And I worked in the most southern part of Everglades National Park, right on the edge of Florida Bay, where the estuary is more like mangrove forest that you can see in the background here, and a little less like the river of grass. But this was a phenomenal, for my degree is partially in biology. And so for a biologist to live and work in this area where you can find tropical influences of plants and animals that you can't find anywhere else in the lower 48 states was really a phenomenal experience. And one of those animals is right there. That is the American crocodile. And the southern tip of Florida is the only place in the world where crocodiles and alligators, a species of each, live in the same place. So that's just one glimpse of the amazing biology that was there. So after the Everglades, I managed to almost find the park that was the furthest away from the Everglades, and that was Glacier Bay, Alaska. And so I made my way up across the continent and spent some time at Glacier Bay. I spent one summer there, which was also an amazing park, just because Alaska, if you've never been there, has some really amazing wildlife and landscapes that are still truly wild, really. But tidewater glaciers that come all the way down to the ocean, are what makes Glacier Bay famous. And so here I am on a cruise ship in front of the Marjorie Glacier. So some of the coolest experiences ever were from that. But really, just when you spend your day on a cruise ship in a national park, there was no port. There was no place for that cruise ship to stop, and the visitors never got off the cruise ship. So the rangers had to go to them. And here's a glimpse of that process. That ladder in the background is a rope ladder where you climb up into the cruise ship. And so I got to start my day every day feeling like a pirate, which was really awesome. And spent the day on the cruise ship, and then got to get off the same way to get back to my quiet ranger quarters where there wasn't a lot of visitors, which was nice too. So this year that I spent going from Everglades to Glacier Bay and back was pretty incredible. I had a really great bird list that year from all the seabirds I saw and all the tropical birds I saw. And I felt like my seasons were reversed that year. I had my winter was in summer up in Glacier Bay, and my summer was in winter down in the Everglades. It was my first experience being a snowbird, and I know why that's so appealing now, for sure. All right, so after I spent that time bouncing back and forth, I landed my first actual permanent job with the Park Service. You know, a lot of rangers start out as seasonal. They move around quite a bit. My first permanent job, though, was in Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. So Carlsbad Caverns is famous because it has the largest underground cave chamber. Well, I guess underground is redundant there, but it has the largest cave chamber in the country. The big room is large enough for a jumbo jet to fly through, and so it's really incredible. But on the surface, it was the Chihuahuan Desert. It wasn't too unusual. But 750 feet underground, it was a completely different world, and it was really amazing. But one thing I learned by working in that world was that I didn't really love working underground. And so after about a year there, I was lucky enough to find my way to Zion National Park. which I get the sense a lot of stewards are familiar with, or a lot of folks in the Phoenix area are familiar with. It's not that far away, just a little further than the Grand Canyon, although you do have to go around that big hole in the ground. But my time at Zion National Park was interesting. It was about almost 5 years there. And during that time, Zion was consistently in the top 5 most visited national parks in the country. And was a very busy place to work, and kind of fast paced. But I still did have time to get out on the trails and enjoy myself. And by now you can all tell what hand I take my selfies with, because I think all these pictures have looked exactly the same. But at Zion National Park, this is a short little time lapse of me working at the visitor center. It was a busy place, as I've mentioned. My supervisor told me one year that I had worked 700 hours at this visitor center. And that was the most of anybody on staff. And as far as we were concerned, it might have been the most of any ranger in the Park Service. And so it stands to reason that I might have contacted more people that year than any other ranger. So yeah, my time at Zion was, I had lots of engagements, lots of experience contacting folks. Now, another big similarity between stewards and being a park ranger was some of the job duties that I had while I was at Zion. So I'm going to go through a few of them here, and just to show you, what steward activities are very similar to what I did as a ranger. We just start off with that visitor center. The visitor center work is very much like what trailhead ambassadors do, welcoming folks to the trailheads, helping orient them, plan their day, and maybe answering other questions that come up. I also spent lots of time roving the trails as a park presence out there, and that's the same thing that patrol does. They get out there into the preserve, and they are out there to be of assistance and to share the love of the preserve while they're out there. I led ranger walks, which is very much what Guided Hike and Bike does. I gave ranger talks, which all of our lectures through whatever program they come from are very similar to that. I dealt with junior rangers. I did youth education, and so that or drop-in programs where you had people just stop by to look at a few things, and that's very much what the nature guides do. And then, sometimes while I'm out on those trails, we would clean up some graffiti. A lot of times it's just like kids using rocks to scrape into other rocks. And so you just sort of brush that off or rinse it off with some water. And that reminded me a lot of what construction and maintenance does, only just not quite as technical. And then there's one other thing, not officially one of my duties as a ranger, but there were other rangers in the park that did research and science. And so I had the opportunity to do some cross training with that. And so that's very much like citizen science. And just to give you a glimpse of what that means, here I am in my winter uniform, which includes a tie, and I'm holding up a shade for a bighorn sheep that you can just see the horn of there. We were tagging bighorn sheep, and the biologist was like, "Hey, you got a little bit of time? You want to come out and help us?" And I scampered off and was helping the biologist. So yeah, it was quite a variety, which is very much what the stewards have access to. And if stewards are participating in many different programs, they might as well call themselves rangers at this point. My specific job, though, was as an interpretive ranger. And you might think of interpretation as like language interpretation. And in a sense, we can create a parallel here, except interpreters are translating the meanings of park resources to help visitors understand and connect to them. And the formal definition is going to be it's a communication strategy. So this mission-based communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between interests of the audience and the meanings inherent in the resource. Now, that wonderful paragraph comes from our professional organization, the National Association of Interpretation. And I bet that there have been many, many master's degrees that have been earned trying to see if that works or how that works. And And I connect to this idea a little differently. So I'm going to share a quote with you instead. This comes from Sir David Attenborough. And he says, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. And the interpreter can step in to help people connect to and understand the experiences they're having at a level where they begin to care, and hopefully that leads to future protection. And so that's really what I think is the ultimate goal of interpretation, right there, is to try to create stewards in what once was just simple visitors. Now, if we compare these kind of definitions to how we sometimes describe our stewards, stewards are our ambassadors. They are engaging and educating the public while advancing natural open spaces through science, education, and stewardship. And so interpretation fits into that advancing piece. To effectively advance that, it's a tool that could be in our toolkit for communicating the importance of natural open spaces. And interpretation as a field is a little bit of a science. We learn a little bit of that science. It's going to help us with our educational goals, and hopefully, as I mentioned, create future stewards. And so it really connects to what we do as the Conservancy. All right, so all of that was a rather long-winded introduction to this idea. And today we're going to drill down on a couple of different things. Basically just starting with the foundations of engaging visitors, because you have to have a strong foundation for interpretation to actually work. And then I'm going to go over a few interpretive fundamentals at the end, just to give you a taste of what I'm talking about. But there will be, of course, lots more to learn if you're interested. Now, a lot of these basics, a lot of these foundations of engaging visitors, they're going to be covered in an upcoming ambassador workshop. And this is coming soon. And this is one of the other ideas that came from conversations earlier this spring. And there's been some tremendous work to develop like wonderful, wonderful content for this workshop, which will end up being required for new stewards and part of the refresher for patrol and trailhead ambassadors. So I hope everybody will look forward to learning a little more specifics there and running some scenarios in that workshop. But I'm going to let them cover in-depth coverage of some of these topics through that workshop. And we also might be changing that name. So it might be called something else, but it's going to be the fundamentals of engaging visitors, basically. So one of those fundamentals or foundations is being professional. And this is probably obvious. And I don't think we have any stewards that really have trouble with this. Your professionalism starts with your appearance. So we already have, the uniform, so to speak, the blue shirt that's really recognizable out there. But we also want our stewards to be respectful and courteous, maintain a positive attitude, be aware of the situation, and be ready to handle an emergency. Those are all things that we try to prepare stewards for during S101 and during orientations and trainings out there. But I think it's also important to remember to try to be objective and neutral in your interactions. Wearing that steward shirt, you are the face of the Conservancy, and your actions reflect on the organization at large, in addition to yourself. So here we've got stewards in uniform and wearing big smiles, and I'm drawing an equivalent to the ranger in the uniform. They're both pretty recognizable, at least in this area. The blue shirts are really stand out as somebody that can help you in the preserve. And yes, apparently there was a picture of me on a Asian tourism magazine, which I was not aware of until one of these magazines got mailed to Yosemite while I was working there, and everybody thought it was hilarious. But being professional in the Park Service, one of my most intense experiences was at Glacier Bay. And as I described before, you boarded those cruise ships, and these were long shifts, 10 or 11 hours on the cruise ship, and you're in the uniform the whole time. And so you're really never off duty. Even when you're eating, people are coming up and talking to you and asking questions. And so you were like kind of had to be on the whole time. And it was exhausting, but super rewarding because, you were the only new people that got on the ship all week during the cruise. And so a lot of people like to talk to you. but you had to maintain that professionalism. All right, the next foundation is going to be just thinking about effective communication. And there's a lot of skills in here that we're not going to drill down into too deep. But body language, what are you saying with your body language is important. Verbal and listening skills are both going to be important to make sure you're understanding the visitor and communicating effectively. And then in some cases, for our more challenging engagements, conflict resolution might be a real good skill to work on as well. I think all of us maybe had some challenges with this effective communication during the pandemic. This is kind of what I looked like at Zion after we reopened. It's kind of hard to effectively communicate with someone if they can't really see any facial expressions, and so we had to rethink some of our actions during that time. I'm glad we're somewhat moving through that. All right, so another foundation is to know your audience, and this is just sort of looking for cues and recognizing needs in the visitor. As some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's what this graph is illustrating, but it's saying that there are some basic needs that need to be met before you can progress to more sort of optional needs. And if you notice right at the bottom of that pyramid are physiological needs. So one of the questions we all need to know the answer to is, where is the bathroom? Because if people have to go to the bathroom, they're not going to be caring or paying attention to any other information or education that's going on. So we want to take care of those basic needs when we can. So keep an eye out for visitor cues. If a visitor is in a hurry or not engaging with you, then they're not interested, and your efforts aren't going to really go far. So just be paying attention to that and trying to evaluate when you have an opportunity to move to the next level. And in this section, we also want to pay attention to balancing visitor needs with preserve needs, and this often comes up when we're trying to handle some challenging engagements. For example, if somebody leaves the trail in the preserve, well, one of their needs might be to get a better photo of the saguaro or something else. But of course, the preserve has a need to maintain the biocrust and protect those areas. And so trying to have some empathy for the visitors, recognize that they have some needs, and if you can, we provide alternatives. Like, there's a great saguaro just down the trail. You can take a picture there instead, help us protect the preserve. All right, so the last foundation is to know the preserve. It's going to be kind of hard to educate folks if you don't know much yourself, but that's a process, and you can make steps throughout your time as a steward to keep refreshing or learning more. Stewards are, of course, expected to continually educate themselves, and that's so that they can educate the public. And we have lots of opportunities. For example, this Lunch and Learn today is a great opportunity. There's also recorded Lunch and Learns, and I'm sure next month there's going to be another Lunch and Learn. So definitely the lunching and the learning is really great. But some other good news for education is lectures are back. We're back in the libraries and providing lectures. So make sure you check those out when you can. And then the new Steward Education Program, which was announced in the Thursday newsletter, with some more context, if you want to go back and read it, that is going to be looking at providing additional and expanding opportunities for education in the future, like 12 to 18 months, expect some new stuff. All right, so we've covered some of those basics of engaging visitors. Now I kind of want to move into some interpretive fundamentals, and this is going to get a little jargony, but I want to try to define each of the terms that we talk about. When you're learning about the preserve, I think it'd be a great idea if you start looking for tangibles and intangibles. Okay, now a tangible, it's a pretty easy thing to understand. It's a physical thing in the preserve normally. It's something that you can experience through your senses, okay? But all of those tangible things also have intangible meanings that are built into them. So these are the ideas or concepts that the tangible things represent. And that's generally something that can't be experienced through your senses. So a quick example, A visitor could see the beauty of a bird, but when they learn more about the struggle it has to survive, they might go beyond seeing, just enjoying the view of that bird, to actually admiring or caring about the future of that bird. All right, so here's a few other examples just to pull some things out that I kind of thought that we have here in the preserve. The rocks that form these mountains are very tangible. It's what we walk on to create the trails. And the rock, one of the meanings behind that could be time or strength. Saguaros represent here, community, because so much depends on the saguaro. And adaptation. Any cactus or desert plant has lots of adaptation intangibles. Rattlesnakes can certainly evoke fear in folks, and so that's an intangible. But survival of any desert animal is a great idea behind their existence. Wildflowers represent beauty, fragility, renewal, all great options there. But then even like things that we're sensing, desert heat, the power of that is an intangible that's represented behind that. And of course, we can pull in some safety ideas there. Wildfire, whether that's previous wildfire, the evidence of wildfire as a tangible, it represents destruction for lots of people. But in much of our learning about wildfire, we realize that it is a force of renewal as well. And so those are great ideas to build in, or that they represent. Now, I have bolded a few of these intangibles, and that's because some intangibles are just so broad that they are considered pretty universal. Universal concepts are the intangible meanings that are so apparent, more apparent to more people. So these are ones that really you have the highest chance of connecting people with, because almost everybody has an understanding of things like beauty, fear, time, those things like that. All right, so this next slide I stole directly from the Ambassador Workshop training. This is some of the stages in the engagement that we're going to go through. And if you look quickly at that list, it's pretty apparent that this starts from before you say hi and ends when you say bye, but there's a step in here. This one, number 3, is the meat and potatoes of the whole engagement right there. And so when we talk about interpretation, this step can be described as an interpretive continuum. And it often starts with orientation, and it can progress to information, and ultimately, maybe you have a chance for interpretation. And so spending time on this continuum and looking for opportunities to move to the next level is something that would be great to start looking for. So let's talk about each one briefly here. Orientation questions are pretty easy. They often start with where. So where is the bathroom, for example, or where is a particular trail, or where is Tom's thumb? Those kind of questions. People need to know these basic needs before they are able to progress to learning more about the place. But if they're still interested, if you're getting good visitor cues that they're still interested, they want to know more, then information questions often start with what or when or how. And these were, often some of my favorite questions to get at the visitor center, because it allowed me to get into interpretive responses. But obviously, answering these questions does require some knowledge. And so as our stewards do, when you're out there learning about the preserve, you're adding to that knowledge and making it easier to answer some of these information questions. So I want to take a little sidetrack here to talk about something we in the Park Service we called ranger lore. Ranger lore happens when a ranger was afraid to say they didn't know, and they would end up making up an answer or fudging an answer of some kind. And then that answer all of a sudden shows up in a training for seasonal rangers and gets passed down to other rangers. And after a few years, it might as well be fact, but nobody has ever checked it, and it's not. And that's a situation we don't want to get ourselves into either. So it's okay to say you don't know, but it'd be great if you could try to remember to find out when you have a chance. And then that is the continual education process. Now, this picture here is kind of unrelated to ranger lore. This is a picture of Ranger Dick Ewer in Yosemite, and he's leading a snowshoe hike, and you maybe can't pick out what's on his hat right there. But he's got some taxidermied animals on his hat there. He's talking about pocket gophers and short-tailed weasels living under the snow all winter long. And putting them on the hat was a little form of humor. And I know humor is always a great technique to help connect people to these ideas. All right, now the last stage of that continuum was interpretation. And these are questions that often start with why. And that's when you really know you've got a hook ready to dig deeper. So I'm going to present or show a little example here for how this continuing might progress. Visitor asks, "Where's the Jane Route Trail?" And the steward points him in the right direction. The visitor says, "Great, is there anything cool we should look for?" And the steward says, "Absolutely, a lot of people enjoy the photo with the saguaro near the start." And the visitor's like, "Oh, cool. We are visiting family and we would love photos with saguaros." And there's your opportunity. The steward can step in and say, saguaros are important to lots of families in the desert. If you look for holes in the cactus, these are bird nests. And when the cactus is fruiting, it's like the saguaro is an apartment building and a grocery store all in one. So let's break this down real quick. We started out with an orientation question. The visitor was still interested enough to want to know a little more, and so you can provide some information. And based on that information, you were able to get into interpretation. And to show you what we're talking about, we're talking about a tangible thing, the saguaro. We're talking about one of the intangible meanings that saguaros have, which is families or community. And then this last sentence is key right here. You are using an appropriate technique to connect those ideas for the visitor. And in this case, that technique is an analogy. It's taking something the visitor is familiar with in wherever they live, apartment buildings and grocery stores, and you're comparing that to the saguaro. So that is an example of an appropriate technique. So appropriate techniques are basically the bridge that connect tangible resources and their intangible meanings. So there are lots and lots of examples of appropriate techniques, and I'm betting that many of these are things that we already use, and just you didn't understand that it was a part of this interpretation. So using props or asking questions, telling a story, all of these are going to be different techniques that can be used in different situations depending on what is probably the most appropriate. In fact, giving examples is an example of an appropriate technique, which is pretty great. Now, you might be wondering why there's a picture of a door handle on this page, and that's a valid question. In the Park Service, we have a whole government document, a good 20 pages, that goes through a list of all of these appropriate techniques and describes them. And the only image in that document is a bunch of different images of door handles. And that's because these techniques represent the handle on a door to this interpretive opportunity. And so you're grabbing these handles and opening the door, hoping that the visitor will walk through to that deeper connection. So that's another metaphor there. All right, so also within interpretation, within these ideas, we are always trying to elicit some emotional and intellectual connections. And a great way to remember that is emotional connections make you say, "Oh my," and intellectual connections make you say, "Aha." And we are always looking for ways to do one or the other, or sometimes both can be some of the best connections that we can make. So emotional connections can sometimes be the most powerful. They can connect people to loss or hope or wonder. And apologies for the leaf blower if you can hear that. Intellectual connections are something that came most easy to me, because as you're learning facts and figures, it's really easy to try to cram those into your interpretation. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of people are not great at remembering numbers or years, and so if we take those facts and figures and we try to do comparisons, it might be easier for folks to remember. In fact, I can't tell you how big the big room at Carlsbad Caverns was, but I can tell you that you could fly a jumbo jet through it. And to lots of people, that's an immediate connection and a meaning, aside from just a number of feet. All right, so at this point, I want to take just talk about inflicting interpretation. And this relates to, making sure that we're always trying to set a strong foundation and visitors are open to interpretation before we try to force it on them. This is an image of happy visitors waiting in line for the shuttle bus at Zion National Park. And unfortunately, this is an all too common picture, but we have some volunteers that would take an opportunity to go out to this line of this captive audience and basically start force feeding interpretation by shouting facts and figures or showing things. And some visitors really got into that, but some of them probably didn't appreciate it very much either. So we want to pick the right time and place. We have other volunteers that would set up their stations using their props, their appropriate techniques, and allowing visitors to come up to them if they were interested and learn more. And those I think end up being more effective engagements for sure. Talking about challenging engagements, which does happen, there's a couple of basic guidelines here. As a steward, we want everyone to stay professional and stay safe. And regardless of the outcome of the engagement, if those two things are met, then I would say it's successful. Stewards try to educate. We actually don't enforce the guidelines or the policies in the preserve. That's the city's job, and we may be getting assistance with that in the future. But as an interpretive ranger, I had no enforcement power either. I carried a radio for emergencies, but I didn't have the whole Batman utility belt that the law enforcement rangers did. And so when I would talk to visitors, I would be like, look, I'm the fun ranger, not the gun ranger. I just want to help you understand why we need this compliance. And a lot of times that's all it took. You explained a little bit of the why behind it, and a lot of people just didn't know. And they were happy to do that when they were asked. So if we can suggest alternatives, that will help with compliance as well. And above all, please don't let these interactions get to you. Try to brush it off. People, unfortunately, they don't leave their problems at home when they go traveling or when they visit the preserve. And so sometimes it's their problem and not yours. And we want to try to leave it that way. Now, during my time with the Park Service, I obviously had lots of these type of challenging engagements where you're trying to get compliance with some kind of a rule. And I apologize for this picture quality, but it was too good to leave out. This is actually my aunt, and she's a hilarious woman. And but she's from the city, and so she came to visit me, and she was so excited to take some pine cones home, and she wanted to spray glitter on them and put them on her mantelpiece. And I explained to her that actually in the national parks, everything's protected and has its place. It's part of a cycle, and she totally got it. She totally understood it, but then immediately wanted to stage this photo like I was arresting her so that she could text all her friends about it. But on a more serious note, at Zion National Park, I had to deal with a very common engagement that thankfully we really, to my knowledge, don't have to deal with very much at the preserve, and that's approaching wildlife. This is the lawn of the Zion Lodge. It's right in the middle of Zion Canyon. It's got hundreds of people that walk around all day, and at twilight, the mule deer like to take over. I call them the lawn care crew. They come out there and trim the grass. But visitors are thrilled at this kind of experience, to be close to wild animals, and a lot of them didn't know how to act. And this family on the side is doing such a great job just staying kind of on the pavement. And that was, the rangers were kind of trying to say the grass is for the deer, pavement's for the people. But we got this guy back here. He's a problem. Besides his pop collar, the problem here is that he's too close to the deer. And not only is that a problem, because anytime animals get close to people, the animals are on the losing end of that interaction. And when these deer learn that people are not a threat and they start approaching them, then people can get injured. So that's an intellectual connection that I can try to explain that to this gentleman, and he'll respond to that maybe. But there's also an emotional connection I can make, and I can say, you know, the national park is to protect some of the last wild animals in the country. And by approaching them like this, you're in effect stealing a little bit of that wildness away from them. You're impacting the animal's experience in their home, and sometimes that is another good connection to make. Now at Zion, we also had one of my favorite signs I've ever seen in any national park. We had to produce this one here with the deer that might as well be Godzilla on that sign, which is hilarious to me. But this is because we actually did have some visitors get injured by deer because they were approaching too quickly. And again, this isn't Yellowstone where we have to worry about bears or bison, but it was an issue for the park, and it caused a lot of these challenging engagements. All right, so I would encourage everybody to start thinking about interpretation as something that they might want to try. It might be easy to start with a couple of common questions or situations that you find yourself in when you're in the preserve. A couple of really common things, and think through this process to try to be intentional and imagine what you might do. So what are the tangibles that are involved? What do you feel are some of the potential intangible meanings that they could represent? What are a couple of techniques that you might be comfortable using to connect visitors that are open to this opportunity? And prepare for that opportunity, that opening. It doesn't come with every engagement, but when it does, you want to have something in your back pocket to be like, here we go, extra connection for you. All right, so to wrap up today, I just wanted to tell a short story about the Park Service image here. This arrowhead logo is very identifiable, and if anybody's been to a national park, they probably really recognize this. And like any good images or logos, it's full of symbolism and symbols. And this bison at the bottom represents a lot of the wildlife that is protected in our national parks. We've got some nice mountain scenery here, which represents a lot of the scenery that's protected. Even the shape of the arrowhead represents cultural history that's protected in many of our sites, especially in the Southwest. But pretty large, taking up a big chunk of the image, is the tree there. And that tree is actually a giant sequoia. Giant sequoias, the largest living things on the planet. And those trees actually played a role in inspiring the creation of national parks. When Yosemite was set aside in 1864 by Abraham Lincoln, the Yosemite Grant actually specifically called out the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias as one of the reasons, one of the outstanding characteristics that made it worthy of setting that land aside for all to enjoy. So this is a picture of a giant sequoia cone. And that cone is about the size of an egg. And inside that cone is a bunch of tiny, tiny seeds that are maybe the size of a flake of oatmeal. And to imagine that something that small can grow into the largest organism on the planet is really an amazing transformation. But some people don't realize that this cone actually has a special place on the park ranger uniform as well. It's featured on the hat band and on our belt too, but the hat there with the brass logo is really my favorite part of the whole ranger uniform. That little cone right there, to me, it represents that the rangers, one of our goals is to plant these seeds and hope that they grow into amazing, beautiful things. And those seeds are often just ideas. And we have some pretty amazing ideas here at the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve. And we also have some pretty tiny seeds. So those of you that know, these are saguaro cactus seeds. And so I think that we can imagine ourselves being that seed, and interpretation is the tool to plant it and cultivate that into a future of stewards. So again, thank you for joining me today. There's a couple of resources. I just wanted to flash this up. If you're watching the recording, you can pause it and copy these down. There's a website that goes a little bit more into interpretation there, but more importantly, there's a nice little training. It's a free training that you could sign up for. It's self-paced, an hour or 2 or 3 hours it might take to go through more in depth some of the foundations of interpretation that I was talking about today. And of course, we have lots of great resources on staff. You know, Claire and Jen with education just got certified through National Association of Interpretation, and I am a resource, so please contact me anytime. All right, so I would love to answer questions with the last 10 minutes or so that we have, if there are any out there.
There I am. Hello, Brian. Thank you so much. This was awesome. Awesome learning experience. And thank you for the resources. I definitely will check them out. You know, really, so the questions aren't really questions that I have, but everybody is complimenting you and saying how wonderful they thought it was. And to put maybe the resources into the newsletter so we can all look at them again.
Okay.
And so if you want to unmute and ask Brian a question, we have a couple of minutes.
Brian, this is Denise Gergen. I'd love to just ask if you have any examples or stories about warning without frightening visitors when our rattlesnakes are out.
Oh, good one.
Sure. I think when I would encounter a visitor that was, you know, obviously afraid of something or asking a question because, you know, they had that little fear, I would always try to start with that the animals are way more afraid of us than we are of them. And for an animal, especially like a rattlesnake, it's going to try everything it can to avoid a confrontation. You know, when a rattlesnake bites, if it uses its venom, you know, is a cost to that rattlesnake. It has to use it for its own survival. And if it doesn't need to, it doesn't want to. So for a lot of people, like in the Park Service, we had a fun stat that if you were not a male 18 to 24 and you were not using alcohol, then your chances of encountering a rattlesnake in a negative way were super low, just based on the stats. So like maybe a funny stat like that might help, just making sure you share that the animals are more afraid of you than you are of them. And that if you're staying on the trail and you're keeping aware of your environment, you have very little to worry about. Because even if you see a snake, you can keep your distance and you're good. You try to get a selfie with it or you try to handle it, you're in for trouble. And so you want to avoid those kind of activities. So yeah, that would kind of be my summary for that. And we could break down some of the interpretation behind it, but I think a lot of our interactions can be reverse engineered that way. You can look at them and identify the interpretive components and content, and in some cases strengthen it. But in many cases, we're already doing some of these things. It's not going to be a huge change, but understanding it is maybe the biggest change that we'll have our appreciation for what we actually are doing out there as an impact. Thanks for the question, Denise.
Again, I was muted. Does anyone else have any questions?
So this, Robin, so I have I don't know if it's a concern or whatever, but if I hear other stewards kind of trying to enforce something like folks love to have their ear pods when they're going out for their hikes. I don't think, I mean, they're adults, they can make their own decision. We obviously want to kind of warn them, say, hey, you know, in order to hear the rattlesnakes, if they are on the trail, it's best if you don't wear ear pods. But I mean, since we're not enforcers, I mean, how do you handle that? I mean,
well, I kind of tried to describe that the best we can do is the education and try to get compliance through that. And if we still can't, as long as you've stayed professional, you've stayed safe, it's still a successful engagement, and you've still fulfilled everything we want stewards to be out there. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take that to heart too much. And I know I've been there in those shoes, and it's really kind of devastating when you just get brushed off, and they kind of ignore, you put some effort into this message and they just still ignore you. We're not going to get through everybody. We're not going to reach everybody, and that's okay. The ones that we do connect with, we want to really make sure that they're on board.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question, Robin. Anybody else? All right, I guess that concludes our lunchtime learning for today. Brian, thank you so much. This was awesome. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And please be sure to tune in again on September 8th when we talk about Design to Move, seeds that hitchhike, float, and fly through the desert Southwest.